endeavor to take it away. Actually, I went to go share my screen, and then, of course, my Mac said, like, you have to give permission, and now you have to restart GoToMeeting. So I might have to do that. I might have to jump out and jump back in again in order to do that. Let me try it without, and then I'll restart as a last resort. Beautiful.
Hey.
Everybody can see, I hope. Excellent.
Yes, we can.
Beautiful. Okay. So to start us off, thanks for joining. You know, as Max mentioned, I think I'm very flattered to be the one non-technical talk, but I still do keep this technical. This is all linked to software development, software delivery, going faster, accomplishing your technical goals. But you know, what I find with a lot of engineering efforts, what I find with a lot of technological efforts is the people side is the hard part. You know, the tech is going to Stack Overflow and copy and paste, right? But I know it's not that simple. The people problems are the ones where you can't go to Stack Overflow, you can't copy and paste, and you know, nobody has solved the problem that you're facing in your situation. And there's nowhere that you can sort of copy and paste a solution. So flow engineering is really about the idea of collaborating with other people in order to get better outcomes, to move faster, to get the things that you want to get done, to speak a common language between the business folks in your organization and the technical folks, to speak the same language across different teams and organizations. So if you've got specialized subsystem teams, if you have platform teams, if you have other development teams where you are sharing libraries, all these techniques are going to iron out the creases and remove the barriers that are between all those different groups. And flow engineering is really about giving you a way of having really productive, valuable conversations and getting things done. So that's what it's all about. The reason I say inside out is it's really about this idea of taking everything that floats around in your head and floats around in everyone else's head and getting it out and getting it onto a visual medium that allows you to really talk about it in a constructive way rather than talking past each other or not understanding where each other is coming from. Mapping and this idea of visually collaborating with other people is the most powerful thing that I've ever found through my career to do that, to collaborate and get things done and actually tackle the problems that I saw, which were, you know, almost never technical problems. You know, the biggest problems were always like, how do I talk to my executives? How do I talk to other team leaders? How do I talk to my team and help them understand the thing that I'm trying to help them understand? So this is really about that, and I hope that this is something that's super relevant to you. Maybe not at this moment, but you know, throughout your career, I think we always bump into these problems over and over again. And the reason to stick around through the whole thing is that I'm going to give you a link to a guide that basically walks you through this entire process from start to finish. So you'll have something coming out of this, not just the recording, not just the slides, but a practical step-by-step guidance with a bunch of Q&A or frequently asked questions that can help you sort of do this on your own in your own organizations. So who am I to even talk about any of this stuff? Like, who cares? I've been in tech for about 21 or 22 years now. I started in tech support. I actually started building computers and fixing computers, but real job, I started in tech support at IBM, helping people with Windows problems and printer problems, which I both recommend and don't recommend for obvious reasons. But I moved into everything from build and release engineering through different roles to systems engineering, like building out platforms and building out developer tools and cloud environments and automation like that. And I started DevOps Toronto while I was doing that. And so I've had exposure to a lot of different tools and techniques and learning and challenges and success stories through that. I've also worked in agencies and worked directly as a consultant with a bunch of different companies solving automation problems and workflow problems. And most recently, before starting Visible, which is my company that I run now, focused on flow engineering, I was CTO of a startup that grew to about 60 people. I had 30 people, 30 engineers working under me. So I've worked through all these struggles of alignment and clarity and trying to get everybody on the same page. And flow engineering is really the culmination of all that experience. It's putting everything that I've ever learned into practice and all the mistakes that I've made into a solution that people can use in different contexts. So to set the stage here, like the first thing that I like to talk about, and ultimately I think the most powerful thing that's missing from everything we're trying to do to improve, is clarity. It's very hard to even get clarity ourselves about things, like what is really happening, what is the thing that we should be focused on more than anything else, and what is our plan of attack, right? And that's hard on our own, but it's even harder when we have other people. And there's nothing that we're doing these days that doesn't involve other people, right? We can't make progress on our own. We have to be working in teams. We have to be working across teams. We have to work up the organization. We have to manage up and we have to manage down. And this lack of clarity is the biggest reason why all the efforts that we undertake, like whether it's migrating to the cloud or adopting Kubernetes, these things fail most of the time, right? And they're still failing most of the time, even though we know how to do these things. We should know how to do these things well. We have Agile, we have DevOps, we have all of these tools and techniques that we can draw from, and yet we still screw this up all the time. And we haven't resolved this problem of like 8 different people having 8 different ideas, right? And how often do we actually step away from what we're doing to make sure that we're all on the same page? So flow engineering is really about that. It's like, how do you get to flow by aligning everybody and engineering an environment and a solution that brings everybody together and brings everybody rowing in the same direction. So what I'm aiming to do with something like flow engineering is provide an easy framework for people to have these sessions, to do this mapping together and gain clarity. And it's both clarity and then the idea of making that visual and visible. So not only agreeing in a meeting that we're going to do X, because I think that when we have a document or we have a meeting, you can still sort of come away with a very different personal interpretation of that thing. But I find that maps are a very simple and clear way of getting people to agree on very specific things. And I think that's incredibly powerful. So a lot of people, throw something in the chat if you've heard of the 4 key metrics, or if people in your organization are talking about the 4 key metrics of DevOps and how to actually make some progress with these things. Like I find that a lot of people are focused now on DORA metrics and talking about DORA metrics, but how do you actually make any progress with these things, right? Like where do you start? If lead time and deployment frequency and mean time to recover or change failure rate are really important, like what do we do about that, right? Do we go to Jira and start poking around and try and find like a report that's going to give us that data? And if so, like what do we do to actually affect it? How do we change our lead time? How do we boost our deployment frequency? It's not like the answer isn't work harder, right? It's work smarter, right? It's work more effectively. So how do we actually do that? And so what I propose as a solution to this and a way to kind of address this problem is remote workshops, especially nowadays. We're not sure when we'll be back in the office and what that's going to look like. This is kind of a remote first approach, which I used to do in person with folks in a conference room on a whiteboard. Now it's all online, and it's easier than ever because it's a bunch of templates that you can use, and it's a very kind of clear approach. Whereas you don't have to worry about what your handwriting looks like on a whiteboard. You can use simple Post-it notes. So I hope that this method is really accessible to folks. That's the entire idea. It's like I want people to be doing this work. But essentially what it is 4 maps that speak to these 4 big challenges, right? The 4 things that make the difference between a low performing organization and a high performing organization. It's a method of actually getting there. It's a method of actually making progress with that. And it's made up of 4 maps, starting from outcomes, looking at a value stream, so looking at the flow of work, looking at dependencies, so things outside the value stream, outside the team, because a lot of the work that we're doing now is cross-team, and then looking inside the team by looking at capabilities. What are the things that we need to do to actually do a great job with this? Or what are the things that are missing that we need to actually address the challenges that we've discovered? So essentially, those 4 maps answer 4 questions. So starting from outcomes, I think it's super important to start from, even if you know what the goal is, if the goal is we need to ship twice as fast, or we need to release every week, that's pretty common, right? A lot of folks are saying we need to ship every sprint to production. Or maybe, you're shipping once a year and you want to get that down to like once a quarter, whatever. It's good to not only know that, but to kind of like break it down. And I think that not a lot of folks take the time to kind of take the target and break it apart and look at, what do we actually mean by this? What are we trying to do with that? And what does it mean for us to try and approach that outcome? And then the value stream, you can ask, like, what are we actually doing now, right? Like, how does this even work? Because we kind of have this idea floating around in our heads. The idea is different for every single person. And we're not always sure about where the biggest bottleneck in that process is, right? Our release process, if we're trying to shrink it, we should probably be targeting our efforts at where the real bottleneck is, not where we think it is, or where, the industry says, like, some focus point is, like your CI/CD pipeline. Like, the spoiler alert is that your biggest challenge is not in your CI/CD pipeline, right? It's upstream or it's downstream. But your biggest automation challenge isn't the thing that's already automated. It's the thing that's not automated, right? It's the thing that's not in your system, in your pipeline currently. So what do you do about that? How do you even find out where that bottleneck is so that you can target it? And then in a lot of cases, the bottleneck is outside your team, right? You've got like legal review that you have to deal with. You have some quality assurance. Maybe you have like user acceptance testing. Maybe you have like a DBA who has like a huge SLA, like a 10-day SLA. And no matter what you do, you're never going to be faster than that big, huge bottleneck of 10 days, right? So why even try? If you're trying to shave like 20 minutes off your process, but you have 10 days of delay, who cares? Who cares about your 20 minutes down to 10 minutes? It's not going to move the needle. No one's going to notice the difference, right? So having avenues of like starting these conversations and going to your bottleneck and having a conversation about, like, here's the whole picture and here's the piece that you're involved in. What can we do about it? Is really powerful if you actually want to make a difference. And then the capability mapping piece is about really addressing those dependencies. So if you find a dependency outside your team, or if you find a bottleneck inside your team, chances are it's tied to a capability that you either don't have, or it's not at the level that you need it to be at, right? There's a reason why you need to go to another team to do something. There's a reason why it takes a long time to do something, or it's complex, or there's quality issues with something that you're doing inside of your team. And it's probably due to a lacking capability, right? It's a capability that needs maybe training, maybe it needs support, maybe it needs documentation or some form of light automation. Maybe it needs a playbook, who knows? But we can ask those questions, and we can do that in a really constructive way by mapping this out. So there's one slide to screenshot. This is the slide, but I'm going to go into all this in more detail. And of course, I'm going to give you the slides and the guide at the end that takes you through all of this. Starting from outcomes, what I mean when I talk about outcomes is, of course, we need to start anything by thinking about, the destination, right? You start a journey thinking about the destination. But this can also be really helpful, and it's in most cases it's helpful because we've already set off towards the destination. We already know what the destination is. It's just taking forever to get there, right? Or it just feels like we're not making as much progress as we should, or this is a lot harder than it seemed. And we have every single day, we have the opportunity to kind of step back and just rethink things for a moment. And maybe it's just looking at the desired outcome from a different perspective. And doing that together can unlock some amazing results. So what we do with outcome mapping is we start with that outcome. We make sure that, is this actually the thing, right? Sometimes people will take an outcome and they think, well, yeah, I know what the outcome is. But they're actually like, the way that they word it and the way that they frame it is completely different than you. And so you're actually heading in different directions, even though you feel like you both understand it. So just getting in a room or a virtual room and joining your thoughts together and coming to a common understanding can be humongous. It can actually be the difference between like, yeah, no wonder we haven't really been making a lot of progress. We were both looking at this from two different angles. So the next part about the outcome is the why. And I think the why can be really helpful because a lot of times we have an outcome and we didn't come up with it, right? It comes from leadership and they tell us, do this thing. We need to get this done. The why can make it real for people, right? It can inspire people. It can make it kind of personal. So getting a team together and saying like, okay, why is this valuable? Whether it's valuable to us or the company or our customers, we can pull that out. And we don't capture everything, but we vote on what are the things that most resonate with us. So the most powerful things bubble up to the top. And the same thing happens with obstacles. What's in the way? Why haven't we done this already? Like, what is making this challenging? So the most important things bubble up to the top. And mitigation is all about like, what can we do about this? And of course, like flow engineering is a way to get started with this stuff, but there's a lot of things that you could be doing. And then measures come after this, right? We start measuring once we know what we want to do, because our measures are going to actually dictate our approach, right? If we're starting to do things and then coming up with measures afterwards, that is backwards. And not a lot of teams understand this, and it's kind of counterintuitive. But starting with a measure, Eli Goldratt, there's this famous guy who's wrote a book called The Goal. He's kind of the reason that the Phoenix Project exists. Is he has this quote of like, tell me how you're measuring me and I'll tell you how I behave, because it's what we do. Like if we have a measure, we're going to try to move the needle on the measure. So measure is extremely powerful, but kind of we have to get there by going through all these other phases to really understand what should we be measuring, right? Maybe it's the 4 key metrics, maybe it's something else. It's probably something more specific. So to get to flow and the part about the work that's happening, here's an example from a company called CTO.ai. If you don't know them and you're in the DevOps space, you should check them out because they're all about workflow automation, building tools into Slack, and making really helpful tools and integrations with workflow. But themselves, because they're interested in workflow and they're interested in helping people with workflow, we work together on mapping their software development process because they were interested in, well, it's, we talk about this thing all the time. We should look at how it works for us. So when we mapped out their software development process, you can see on the left here, these points, these arrows. And what would happen is we go through all the process. There's a bunch of red there. There's a bunch of delays. But the big pieces were like, we get to certain phases and people find problems with the work and then they throw it back. In some cases, they throw it way back. So all the way down this process, if you follow all the way to the triage process, this is basically after everything is done, everything is built, they would throw it all the way back and say like, this is not what we wanted. And so we had to engineer a process that prevented that from happening because it takes tons of time and it's hugely wasteful. It also sucks to be an engineer in that situation where you get all the way to production and then the executives or the stakeholders, whoever, maybe the biggest customer who you're building this for says, no, that's not what we wanted. This doesn't work the way that we hoped it would. Or there's a big bug, that didn't get tested. So we engineered this process to be highly optimized. So we shrunk 20 steps down to 8 steps so we could get faster feedback, which meant we ship things to production faster. And then if there was any of that feedback, there's a much lower cost, right? So we're getting faster feedback. It means we're also able to adjust to that feedback. And there's less stress involved, right? We're not batching up like, this isn't 6 weeks worth of work that's then getting thrown back. We're doing this in like a week. And so the feedback is small, it's actionable, it's very clear, it's tied to something that we just worked on instead of something I worked on 2 weeks ago. And so all of that facilitates this like better operating model. So we went from 20 steps down to 8 steps, 9 weeks down to 1 week. And all that means is that it felt better to be an engineer. It felt better to be a leader in the company who's like wanting to see this work get finished. And it meant that a lot more was happening with a lot less stress. And that just meant for, better outcomes. So what this kind of looks like in terms of the actual illustration that we're talking about, the mapping itself, is nowadays it looks like this. So this is Mural. You can use Miro, you can use any kind of collaborative whiteboard space. I've used Google Drawings, I've used all kinds of different things. You can use Google Slides if you wanted to. But the pieces here that are valuable are the timing and the steps. So the steps you could get from a flow chart. Everyone's seen sequential flow of activities. It doesn't really help you that much. It might help you if you have no idea what it looks like. But what's really valuable here is the measurement. And the measurement above is the time it takes to do the activity. The measurement below is the time between the activities. And usually that's where the sweet spot is the handoffs. How much time passes between activity B and activity C? So in this case, we can see very clearly out of all this stuff, what things are popping out. So you'll notice like 7 days of development, I don't care how long you develop stuff, right? I'm not gonna criticize how long it takes you to develop stuff. But if it takes you 3 days to review that, that's probably a challenge, right? That's probably a problem because you want faster feedback. And the review is like, it could be a checklist, right? It could be something that's very easy to improve and optimize. If it takes 3 days and it takes 10 hours between and 5 hours after, and you're constantly going through this code review process while you're developing, then you incur that penalty over and over again, right? So that's a highlight. But you have an even bigger opportunity in this QA section. You can see 3 days plus 3 days. So 6 days versus 4 days. Now we have a clear priority 1, priority 2. And that's really powerful because if we ask 8 people about what the biggest priority is or the biggest bottleneck, you'll get 8 different opinions. So this helps us go from everyone's opinion to clear priorities. And I think that's really powerful. And it's visual. So this same thing, you could put this in front of an executive, you could put this in front of a partner or a customer even. If you're trying to describe like the onboarding process or an integration process, everybody can understand it because it's simple. I think that's really, really important. So in the case of real life, and I'm going to present a bunch of cases, like we were able to do this process for a gigantic release. So this company actually had a 4-year release cycle. And what they were targeting was automated deployment. They got in touch with me. They said, we want to start doing automated deployment because this is a really important piece of making progress with DevOps. And we think it's, a major pain point for us. But once we actually mapped the value stream, we found these 2 other opportunities. Like number 1, acceptance testing was taking forever, and environment update was taking forever. So we were actually able to ignore the thing that they were focused on once we looked at the data. And that's hugely powerful, because if you've got millions of dollars to spend on something and you have, 18 months to do it, you better point that in the right direction, or else, you're going to make some improvement, but it's not going to move the needle, right? If you get rid of like 6 hours in your process, but you've got 3 days somewhere and 8 days somewhere else, you really haven't done anything that anyone's going to notice. So this focus on the biggest bottleneck, I think, is incredibly powerful, but we need ways of doing it and doing it together, right? So the mapping and the collaboration aspect of this is about getting everybody on the same page together to do it. So I mentioned dependencies, the next phase of this. Once you find these bottlenecks, sometimes the way to actually address the bottleneck is outside the team and outside the value stream, or it's inside the value stream but outside of the team that you're on, or the team that you have control over. So you need a way of actually like illustrating, these are the things that are slowing us down, and we can get a lot more detailed with this too, and actually put numbers on it, right? If you have an SLA for Epic approval, let's say, like the team, the PMO says, yeah, we'll approve your Epics, but we have a 3-day SLA because we don't want you to be bugging us, and we don't want to rush, right? We have a backlog to deal with, so you got a 3-day SLA. You could put that 3-day SLA on the dependency map. You can put all your timings, and then you can measure it the same way that you measure the value stream, and highlight the areas that are taking the most time. In this case, we're highlighting the areas where there's just all these different concerns around testing. And that's because we highlighted testing before. So as we look at the different maps, all these things start to come together, right? The obstacles that you identify in the outcome map, they get proven or disproven in the value stream map, and then they get proven or disproven, or they get justified or explained as you look through the different maps as well. So as we look at dependencies, we're like, yeah, no wonder we're seeing all this testing stuff. Testing was the major bottleneck. It's also the major obstacle. And so now you're building this like really rich base of information that you could take to anybody. You could take it to senior leadership and say, because of this, we need some time to go and tackle this. And here's the reason. Here's what it looks like. And that's way easier than having a discussion, right? Or writing up a document or a proposal or making a presentation even. It's a visual way of making it very, very clear for people. And then you can have a really constructive conversation about this. And then we can go deep, right? So looking at capabilities kind of dives into the team. It says like, okay, if automated testing is a big bottleneck for us, what would it take for us to get better at that, or to actually fix it? So we look at these different dimensions and capabilities. First of all, one of the things that isn't shown on this capability map, because I wanted to keep it simple, but it's really important, who owns that capability right now, right? And does that person who owns it, do they have a backup? Or, no wonder we haven't made progress with that, because the same person owns all 5 of these capabilities. So they're constantly juggling. They're always distracted by all the problems that are popping up across all these capabilities, and they have no backup, right? So no wonder we're not making any progress there. That's a very clear realization that otherwise, when are you gonna see that, right? You're gonna hear that person complain maybe, but they're probably not the type to complain. If they're the type to, do a lot and contribute a lot to the team, if they're the type to own a lot of things, they're probably not the same type of people who complain. So the capability mapping allows you to see these things you can't see and surface these things that are hidden in the team, and then tackle them in very specific ways, because maybe the problem isn't ownership. Maybe it's the fact that it takes forever to train someone. So when we want to scale that capability up, it's going to take us 6 months to train people right now. And so we're 6 months away from a fix. Or you can look at what are the resources available. If we have no resources, that means that someone has to learn that capability. They have to sit with someone else, potentially, slow them down or distract them from producing in order to scale this capability or deepen this capability. So it gives us different ways of kind of seeing all these problems from many different directions and dimensions and make it actionable, right? Because once we highlight, okay, well, this gap could be filled by a playbook, right? That would make it easier on Jane, who's like, Jane has to step away from what she's doing every time somebody has a problem with this capability because she's the only person who knows about it. But if there was a playbook, then maybe 90% of those cases go away because someone could just use the playbook. Someone could just look at the documentation, or they could just use an API. And we can find these opportunities and focus on them once we map them out. So that's it. There's 4 maps, primarily 4 maps. I mean, you could add to this. In other cases, I talk about road mapping. I talk about taking the outcomes from this and plotting them onto a roadmap and assigning KPIs. There's all kinds of things you can do to build on top of this. You can also look at Wordly mapping to structure your architecture and plot all your different capabilities in a different view, which can be super helpful. But I just want people to start mapping. I just want, instead of just going to a whiteboard only when we have architecture to draw out, start mapping flow, start mapping workflow, start mapping things that are slowing us down, rather than the static architecture of our systems and our organizations. Looking at flow allows us to, get more time to do whatever else we want to do, right? If we can save, it's pretty common for teams to save 1 day a week by doing something like this. And so you can take that and do whatever you want with it. You can use it for all the engineering you want, but right now, if you don't have the time, there's not a lot you can do to get breathing room, right? And to make things easier. So again, to recap, we're looking at outcomes, starting from clarity, starting from a common understanding, looking at the value stream, looking at the flow of work and what's actually happening, finding the bottlenecks. And then we look at dependencies to find out what might be causing the dependence, causing those bottlenecks outside the team and slowing us down from outside. And then we look at capabilities, what's impacting us from the inside. And this is like a 360-degree view of everything that's going on in your development and delivery process. And I've never found anything else that helps you kind of see these things and see them together, which I think is really important. More examples of this. So it works for all kinds of different activities. This is a case from a travel technology firm. They had a partner model where they were working with major travel kind of infrastructure brands like Expedia and Booking.com. Every time they wanted to integrate with those partners, they had a 12-month lead time of like, here's how long it takes for us to do that integration. And they wanted that shrunk, of course. And their target was to shrink it to 3 months. But we shrunk it to 3 months without even changing any of the activities. We just got rid of a bunch of handoffs, a bunch of delays. We ran some things in parallel. But if we actually optimized the activities themselves, we could have shrunk that to probably 3 weeks instead of 3 months. And what happened was immediately afterwards, like I mentioned, that 20%, we got 23% improvement like the next day, just by doing things a little bit differently, just by eliminating some of the handoff or some of the delay. In some cases, what happens is you have an email that goes from one part of the company to another part of the company. If you just swap that with maybe some automation, like instead of an email, you get a Jira issue that gets automatically created, or a Slack message that gets automatically sent when you do a specific thing. This is where the engineering comes in, right? There's the technical solutions to this are awesome because you can take away a lot of this manual stuff with simple automation and see huge improvements. But if you can't see the bottlenecks, if you can't see where the big gaps are, then you don't know what to put the automation on. And automate everything is terrible advice because you should always just be automating your top priority and then move on to the next one. My other one, this is a small agency actually, and what they were trying to do was go from, we have separate projects. Every client is a new project, and it takes us forever to go through the entire process of getting them on board, getting them up to speed, doing what we, agreed to do, and then moving on and putting it into production. And they wanted to move towards more of a product model. So they have a standard process that's very clear, that helps their customers understand what's going on and makes it very clear to them, like how to optimize that process, right? If it's not standardized, it's really hard to optimize. And so we're looking at ways of standardizing. We were tackling these throwbacks. So you can see these arrows from QA back to development, from code review back to development. How do we minimize the amount of time when that happens? And they were trying to go from 4 weeks for this process down to 2 weeks. We actually got 60% of the waste and delay removed. So we did much better than our goal. And that's cutting things in half. Like, that's pretty huge. You're going twice as fast, right? They were going faster than twice as fast right after doing this process. So the whole thing from start to finish, and I promise I'm wrapping up. There's a lot of seemingly wrap up stuff here, but this is it. This is the final stretch. There's a flow of activities to this. So we look at outcomes first to make sure that we are all on the same page and we know where we're headed. Then we actually look at, what does it mean to be focused on flow? What does flow actually mean? What are we doing with this? But then we get into mapping and we look at the value stream, dependencies, capabilities, and we can go beyond that. You can use all the learning from those mapping sessions to build hypotheses and build experiments and things that we're going to try to do. You can plot those on our roadmap, and then we can build this capability. So once you go through this with a pilot team, you can have a dedicated enabling team. If you guys are familiar with team topologies, you can have an enabling team, a team that's dedicated to doing this kind of work, jump around the organization and hit all the teams that are doing similar things, share learning, scale it up, help them do this kind of activity, because this is really hard if you're trying to do this inside your team, right? If you're trying to, we can't really see the water that we're swimming in. So it helps to be outside. It helps to be in a position like mine where I come in from outside, because it's hard to navigate the politics. It's hard to see things that you're really used to, because we adjust, right? We get used to what we're seeing. But this whole process can really scale, and it can cover the entire organization with very little effort, because it's a standardized approach. So if you're looking for the start to finish, more information, flow.visible.is has this flow engineering book, which basically walks through all the mapping activities. And that's it. If you want to get in touch with me, please do send me an email at steve@visible.is. I would love to talk to you about this. And if you're having challenges working with different teams in your organization, or you've got these dependencies that are constantly slowing you down, that's exactly what I love to help people with. So please do get in touch with me. If we have time for questions, I probably went way longer than I hoped to, but I'd love to talk about any questions that you have too.
Yeah, this is really cool, by the way. Thank you. How much time do you spend on average, like with let's start a different place. What kind of teams is it you're doing this with? Is it
good question.
Are you called by a dev manager? Are you called by a CIO? Or are you CEO?
It's usually VP engineering.
Okay.
Who that's me. It's people who are trying to do things faster. That's the number one motivation, is that right now we release once every 3 weeks. We want to release every week, or we release every 6 weeks. We want to release every month.
Yeah. So you never call
whatever it is. That's the number one.
Yeah, the PMO wouldn't call you because they're just trying to slow us all down.
I wish they would call me. I wish they would.
Yeah, no
Someday
kidding.
they will. I hope that happens, because I think I have a lot of sympathy for the PMO, but also I think there's a lot of practices there that do slow things down and add friction.
Yeah. I feel similar. I have sympathy for them, but I also don't, because I feel like they're just doing it to themselves sometimes.
Yeah, I think that part of the key to this is a mindset, right? It's like a way of seeing things. And ultimately, I think it's a lot of it is that they just haven't seen what it really looks like, you know, and where the real challenges are.
Yeah. So when you go into I mean, now the number of times you've done this, you must see stuff pretty quickly, just jump right out. But is it like there's got to be stuff? I mean, how much can you see? Like imagine, you know, like you're getting some great results, obviously, but I feel like the longer you spent with them, the more results you could probably get, because they're not telling you everything, not on purpose. They don't know.
Yeah,
You know
well,
what I mean? Is that true
it's
or no?
interesting. It is true, of course. I think it's a great point. You do hit diminishing returns, though, right? Like the most effective outcomes that I ever get are teams who've never thought about this and they've never done anything like this before, right? Because then it's night and day. Then I walk in and it's like, oh yeah, ABC. Most teams, I don't even have to look at their value stream. I know where the biggest bottlenecks are, especially if they've never done anything like this. But in a lot of teams, that's not enough, right? They also know where the bottlenecks are. What they need is a way to prove it to an extent that's going to make the case and validate their hypothesis, right? Because you can complain about something all day, you know, no one in leadership or no one who's got the budget to make things better or will give you air cover to make things better, pay down technical debt, wants to hear your complaints. They want to hear like, we have 3 priorities. If we tackle them, and we know exactly how to tackle them also, but if we do, we will save 30% on our lead time, right? Or we will remove 50% of our production bugs by addressing these 3 areas where quality falls apart. And I didn't show quality on this because I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, but basically could show quality degradation across the value stream. And so if quality is your main concern, you can make that argument without saying like, yeah, we don't have enough automated testing. Like no one does, right? Who's happy with the level of automated testing they have? The question is, where do you put it? And where do you put it? Like, where do you put it tomorrow? Where do you focus your efforts? Where is it going to make the biggest impact? And so that's the idea, is that you get really huge return on investment immediately, especially if you're starting from a rough spot. But eventually, you know, you do have diminishing returns as you chip away on this stuff, which means like maybe 3 years from now, you don't have to do value stream mapping, or you don't have to do these mapping techniques. But the point is, you're always going to have people joining the team. You're always going to have people who get used to the way things are going, so that ability to kind of step away. Like I advise teams to do this every 6 months at the very least. Every 3 months is ideal, because it also gives you a chance to kind of innovate as well. I didn't talk about ideal state mapping. It's another thing, but it's a way of kind of reimagining the way that we do things. And that's always helpful, because the game is always changing, right? There's always new technologies arriving. There's things that you can do 6 months from now that you can't do right now. And so the ability to kind of imagine a future state and keep it in mind, it tunes your senses to when that thing shows up, you could take advantage of it and you know exactly where to put it. That's something I think is really powerful too.
Very cool. Thanks for the presentation. Awesome.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Jason's popping questions into the chat.
Let me open it up.
That's not a real question. Well, I suppose it is, but just seems to be my experience that the bottleneck is almost always testing.
Yeah. Sometimes testing is probably number one. You know, people really have a hard time understanding, like, how do we shift testing left so that it's not a silo and it's not a stage that happens right at the end, because that's where it gets really hard, right? So shifting it left, the value stream kind of gives you a structure that helps you show what shifting left actually means. It gives you something to hang all those ideas off of. Like if we just did this on step 2 instead of step 8, then we would have, it would cost us a lot less in terms of time and effort, and it would cost us a lot less in opportunity, like real cost, money cost.
Yep.
But to answer your question, it's also often like product and project management, like early planning, because a lot of those activities, they take a long time. Somebody can come up with an idea and it could sit in a backlog for like 3 years, right? I mean, that's inventory that's going to waste. And somebody spent time on it and it's bothering somebody that it's not being addressed. And the longer it sits there, the more it's getting problematic as well, because it was built on like an assumption of the world as it was then. And that's why people say like throw away your backlog, right? I mean, your backlog at some point it gets to be your biggest enemy, because it's full of assumptions that were made a long time ago that might not like be the case, and it needs to be like cared for and fed at the same time, right? You can't let it get stale. So in the product space, you make it really easy to take an idea and get that into the pipeline, get that into the value stream and get it built. It means you have all these like upstream challenges, all the planning that's really heavy, where people make, changes too big, and they make, they're trying to shove an epic through a process that only really works for a tiny story.
For a bug fix?
You can tackle all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. An epic for a bug fix. I love that. And you have a way of like, there's so many organizations where they have like this one lane highway for everything, right? There's no express lane. There's no on-ramp as well. But like, if everything has to go through the same lane of the highway, then you're only as fast as your worst way of doing things. But in a lot of cases with teams that are trying to kind of escape process prison and go faster, the first thing we do is build a fast track. And eventually the fast track becomes the way that you do everything. But you've got to be able to to unstick yourself. What often is the best way to do it is to create an express lane that's like, if X, Y, and Z are true, fast lane. And it just, it flies through the system. And that gets people like kind of understanding, here's how good it could be if we just expand the criteria for the fast lane.
I got a couple of
Very
questions.
good point. Thank you.
Hey, a couple of questions. The first one is in one of your engagements, I guess, you said that a lot of the you were able to get things done faster by reducing the handover times, right, between the teams. So the question is, how exactly did you get them to? How did you visualize it? That again, how do you visualize it? Make it and made it again. They made the management understand that that's again those are the bottlenecks. And how do you you showed it once? How do you make that visible to the rest of the company? Right? It's just So that'll be
that's a great point. So question number one: how do you highlight these handoffs, and how do you make sure that you're understanding them properly? In a lot of cases, like the timing kind of hints at what's happening, but we could be very explicit. Like in the past, I was very focused on detail and data because I wanted to justify this, and I wanted to make it very clear that this is not just hand wavy stuff. But it was, in a lot of cases, it was more detail than we needed. But you can go through all of the handoffs and say, what I would do is assign an icon to it. And you can use a different colored dot or whatever to say, this is an email, this is a meeting, this just shows up in Jira, this is a Slack message. So what does the handoff look like? And then you can go through and say, anything that's like an automated Slack message, it's like, who cares about it? But if it's an automated Slack message and the handoff is still 2 days, why? What is it? You know, is it going into someone else's backlog? Does it then just end up in a queue? And so you can ask these questions by collecting these kind of simple data points and dig. Whereas like before, it's like, who knows why it takes so long, right? But we can figure it out by pulling all those separate clues, and then correlating them together will give you this like very clear understanding of like, okay, here's exactly why it takes long. It's fast in the handoff, but you know, it's like in a relay race. If you were to hand the baton to someone, but then they're running like 4 races, so they just like stand there and they're like, what baton was this for again? And like, what way were we going? And like, it can be a fast handoff, but in effect like a really slow handoff ultimately. And so we're able to see that by assigning this different criteria to the different data points.
How do you
and then the
like?
second.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna talk about the second one, but
Okay. I was gonna ask, like, just to again to dig into this particular question, right? A lot of times it's like when one team is done, it goes into another team's backlog, right? And that's where it usually gets lost, right? So and especially in big companies. So how do you prevent that from happening? What tools do you recommend? What tools do you find that worked for, again, medium to large size?
Yeah, I think this is becoming a lot easier with like value stream management software, because value stream management software will show you how long something stays in a specific state. But a lot of this, like I think Atlassian or Jira Flow will show you like how long something is staying in a specific state, which means that it was handed off to Department X, it was handed off to a DBA, but then it sat for 3 days. And you could see, then you correlate, okay, well, it sat for 3 days because they have this giant backlog. And then you can look at, okay, well, what's this backlog made of? And if 80% of the things in the backlog have a common solution, maybe we can automate that solution. And then we've just eliminated 80% of the backlog and we've solved the queuing problem. So that's kind of like, that's creating an automated fast lane. But in a lot of cases, what you can do is a non-automated fast lane is, if X, Y, Z are true, you can do this yourself without handing it off, right? So you can say that as long as it's if you want to make a data type change to a table, and the table lies in one of these databases, then go ahead, do it yourself. We're going to give you the privileges to do it. Or maybe you call it through an API and you can do it. But you're not touching, the identity database, right? The identity database is going to go through us 100% of the time. And that's just because we haven't, we don't have a safe way of doing that yet. Eventually we will, right? But the kind of low-hanging fruit and the easy opportunity is, like, if these things are true, here's the fast lane for you. And then in that case, you're eliminating the handoff entirely.
That makes, again, I like the idea of the fast lane, right? Again, come up with the criteria and maybe automate it somehow so it just does it automatically for you. And all you do is just approve it and click a button and the rest of it is done, right?
The key is to not maintain the fast lane and the collector lanes forever, right?
Yeah.
You want to be eliminating stuff that runs through the collector lane. You want everything to go through Express as soon as possible. So it's important to kind of revisit this every quarter, every 6 months, to be like, what's the balance of collector lane versus express lane? How are we? What have we moved into the express lane in the last 3 months? And make sure that you're consistently moving things into the fast lane.
It will be good to have some kind of an automated chat ops or something that says, you know what, you are sitting in the collector lane because you're missing this. If you give me that information, you're gonna automatically move up to express lane.
Yep. Well, that is something that I've tossed around as well. This idea of like flow standards, where you've got very specific criteria in your organization that says like, And it's a checklist that it lives in my head right now, but I'd love to actually build it sooner than later. It's basically like, if these things are true, this is why you're in the collector lane, right? Yeah. You have this manual requirement, you have this approval that needs to happen. You have to go SSH into something. You don't have an API. All these things can tell you like why you're in the collector lane. And I like that a lot. Maybe that's something I should fast track myself.
Yeah, I've seen it with the some of the solutions where they implement the chat ops and again just help you drive that process, right? Instead of you waiting for some person to reply, it's just automatically suggesting some smarts, right? The problem, like you said, it's to maintain it, right? But it's still beneficial to again make the AI smarter, right? The machine learning thing, so it learns on its own.
Yeah, in a lot of organizations where they have like a bottleneck in code review, that's super common. And you not only, even if it works well, you're probably overloading your senior engineers, like the people who are doing code review. They're probably tired of doing basic code review stuff. But it's very easy to have like commit hooks, right? It's very easy to have commit hooks that fire a message to Slack that say like, did you check XYZ? You can build that in. You can do all kinds of lint testing and all kinds of things that you can do, but there's tons of like low hanging fruit, easy ways of like making it easier on your code reviewers by eliminating 80%. Like what is the 20% effort that's going to eliminate 80% of your code review issues? But the key really is stepping back, right, and looking at, okay, well, what do we catch in code review? What are the things that like every single time this is being flagged in code review, and you don't notice when you do it every day? I mean, you know that it sucks, and you're tired of it, but until you step away and you kind of look at the data, you probably don't realize that like, oh my God, like I fixed this problem for every single commit over the last like 6 months, and it's just getting worse, right? Those are the sort of things that you see when you step away.
Hi, Steve. Got a question. Hey. So, want to ask you about like when you're showing the steps, like for example, the map where it shows like the development is 7 days and code review is 3 days. Are those like numbers that you got from the team on their gut feeling, or like trends, or is it captured by data? Is it like, and also is it like an average case, or is it like max or worst case scenario or best case scenario?
This is a great question, and it really depends on the team. In some cases, like they actually have the data, like they go in Jira and they pull it out, and we use that. Sometimes we have to average that data out because they have different, one sprint is different than another sprint. They had a big crunch, and then everybody put in way more effort and time, and so things are different. Sometimes the data doesn't even, the data is not a real representation of what really happens. 90% of the time, what I advise is like opinion. Let's just get different opinions, and we'll work them out, because the thing is, like, the data doesn't live in people's heads, and people have the opinions in their heads no matter what. And sometimes you show people data, and that if it doesn't match my opinion, forget it. So this is not, reality. This is not my experience. So data doesn't solve everything. What I do is, because I'm a facilitator who understands software development, I know how long things often take, should take, could take. And so what we do is we aim for like, what's the 80%? What happens most of the time? And then if it seems way off for me, based on what I know about the team and the process and the value stream that we're laying out, then I can kind of step in and say, that kind of seems a little bit high for me. What is going on there? So if it seems super off, we can dig into it and validate it one way or the other. But people know, right? If there's very few cases where only one person knows how long something takes, and a gut feeling is fine, because we're not like, nobody's comparing, well, this is 4 minutes and this is 7 minutes. Like, we're talking about the worst thing in the value stream is like 3 weeks and everything else is like 4 days, right? So there's, whether it's precise doesn't matter. It's about trying to find out where should we dig deeper and what is the hot spot rather than the precision. Because in no case ever that I've ever mapped a value stream are there like 8 possible bottlenecks. It's very clear there's like, this is bottleneck number 1, this is bottleneck number 2, and sometimes there's bottleneck number 3, but that's really all you need. All you really need is the biggest bottleneck, and then you fix that, and then you can move on to the next one. But in cases where you're able to do 3 things at once, you can have three candidates.
Okay, great. And then when you, after the improvements, you go through the same process and ask those people what the new ones, new numbers are?
Yeah, so you run the same process. I advise like every 6 months, and you have a new bottleneck, right? Because hopefully you've actually tackled and fixed the bottlenecks that you had before. So you have new bottlenecks now.
Right.
So you collect new data, which means that like every 6 months you have a really good story to tell. You probably have a really great story to tell after like 3 weeks. But certainly like at the 3-month mark, you can say like, where are we with the things that we targeted as our opportunities? So like every 90 days, you've got really strong like outcomes that you can share with the organization and say like, we've tackled this, this, and this. Here's the effect that it's had on the value stream.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, you can kind of guess what it's going to be. I can certainly do that when I look at a value stream and I'm like, okay, well, if right now it takes you 3 days to code review, I know code review can be done in 20 minutes, right? I've seen it done many, many times. I've taken teams from 3-day code review to 20-minute code review. So we can predict what it's going to look like. And we know that, okay, if we tackle these 3 bottlenecks, this is going to go from 3 weeks down to a week.
Right.
And then if we make that, oftentimes we beat that, but if we don't make it, we know exactly where to look. Like which one of these bottlenecks did we not pull off, or what was the difference between our estimation and our actual experience?
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question.
Thanks.
How do you recommend, or do you have any advice for avoiding, not sure how to analogy this, but the overzealous step back when you take a step forward and there's almost always something doesn't work out quite the way you planned, and there's fallout from it, and then the reaction is, oh well, that's the end of that, we now need to go back to slow things down even further than we were before because we can't risk having another accident. How do you avoid that kind of that fear of when things go sideways?
That's really an interesting space to think about. What I find, like my short answer to that is that like the mapping activities lower the odds that anything that you do is going to be a gamble, because it's based on some data. Even if it's quantifiable data and it's not quantified data, there's a reason why we're making this hypothesis and we're making this bet, and it's much stronger than the idea that, okay, well, Google says to do this, or this worked for this other company and so it should work for us, or I saw this at a meetup and someone told me to do it. If you connect it to actual data, then your odds of success go way, way up, right? You can also avoid it, because when you try to fix that thing, when you try to address that bottleneck or that issue, the gap that you found, then when you don't succeed, or let's say you make it 80% of the way, you have enough information to actually understand why, right? And you can pin your actions to that hypothesis in a way that you'd have to be in a really shitty environment for someone to like really pull the plug on what you're doing, right? If you're in an environment where you say, based on the information that we discovered in these mapping exercises and the opportunity that they presented and the data that supported this hypothesis, we took these actions, and what we tried didn't quite end up the way that we expected. And here's what we're going to try instead. If an organization, like if a reaction to that is like, you don't get any other chances, this is it, like you screwed up and like we're going to try something else. First of all, like what else are you going to try, right? Like the scientific method is the only thing that we have. There's no other way, like other than, you know, pure cowboy, let's have someone else make a wild, opinionated guess at something. Like you can't beat that approach. No one has beat that approach in the past. That will always be the approach that works. So as long as you've shown that you know, we did the work, and this is a hypothesis that was based on not just opinion, but everybody, right? I mean, the idea behind this, the fact that this mapping is collaborative means that if anybody really thought that this was a shitty hypothesis and that it wasn't, like we were going to screw up and there wasn't an opportunity for us to succeed, they had an opportunity to say something and we could have taken that into account. So the idea, the other like powerful thing about having everybody kind of collaborate on this is that there's no blame, right? There's no individual who put themselves out there and said like, here's what we should do. It's everyone is arriving at that hypothesis, and everyone's bought into that too. So when we fail, it's no individual who failed. We're also looking, because this is another reason I think that capabilities are really important, is that this isn't hinged on any individual, right? We're looking at capabilities of like, how as a team are we able to execute on this thing? And we know why we can't do it as well as we could right now, right? We've broken it down and said like, yeah, no wonder we're not succeeding right now. But if none of those things change, odds are we're not going to succeed. So you can kind of not root cause this stuff, because I don't think root cause is a viable approach, but you can look at all of the factors that are either making it likely for you to succeed or being providing obstacles, right? Unless you're like tackling the obstacles and addressing the obstacles, then your odds of success go down. And I think it's very easy to kind of look at all the data that you collect through this, qualified and quantified data, and say like, you know, either we have really high odds of success, or no wonder we didn't succeed because we said we wanted to do this thing, but we didn't actually tackle the things that are causing this or having the biggest effect.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that statement you made? The root cause is not a good approach.
Oh wow, that's a lot. That's big. I mean, root cause, if you're talking about root cause, you're saying that there's a way to identify a single causal factor for anything, right? So, and what would be that thing, right? The creation of the universe, or where do you stop? Somewhere between the creation of the universe and the thing that happened is the cause. Well, which one is it, right? Is it the fact that we were born and, you know, the company was created, or what are you drawing a circle around as a root cause?
So what do you recommend instead? I'm
Causal
not arguing
factors.
with you. I'm just
yeah. So I think you're not going to find a single cause for anything, right? But you're able to see what are the major factors affecting this and influencing this, or contributing to its occurrence. And that I think is a little bit healthier, because you're not saying, first of all, it doesn't allow people to scapegoat individuals, because that happens a lot of the time. A lot of time people are saying, this is the root cause. That's Phil's responsibility. Phil is the problem. And it's never true, right? The reality is that there's many different things that come together to cause everything. What we want to focus on are the things that are the most contribution, right? The largest contribution, the most impactful contribution. And that's never one single thing. There might be a single bottleneck that we can focus on, but the bottleneck is being caused by all kinds of different things, right? So I think it helps teams to think outside of root cause, because first of all, there's never one thing that's going to make everything better. There's no silver bullet. And the truth is that we can move a lot of levers and we can turn a lot of dials, and there's a lot that we do have the ability to affect. And we should be looking at more than just a narrow focal point.
So I'm sorry, what did you call that approach?
Well, you could call it, I mean, for me, it's a mapping exercise, right? I mean, there's a lot of, there's a specific diagram called an Ishikawa diagram, or fishbone diagram. And it was all about root cause, but it was essentially looking at, okay, who were the people involved? What are the practices that they were leveraging? What are the tools that they had access to? It kind of tries to break things down. 5 whys is another way that people use, but they're all really narrow, right? And what really matters is kind of like a big picture understanding of what's going on here, right? Which is why I'm such a fan of mapping, is because it's never super simple, and it's the solution lies in all the brains on the team, all the brains involved. So however you map it, you know, if you're looking at, we have this problem, the problem is made up of other problems. It's made up of a bunch of different causes. So I don't know what the term for that would be, but it's in a sense, it's kind of outcome mapping, but with, it'd be almost outcome mapping in reverse, right? What is the thing that happened? Why did it happen? What are the obstacles that caused it, you know, that contributed to it? And then how are we measuring that problem so that we can address it? Like, you can use outcome mapping to do that as well. Instead of starting out, you could use it to actually retrospectively examine an outcome.
Thank you.
It's a good question too. That was fun.
Any other questions?
I got to drop, but this has been great. Thank you very much, Steve and Max, for organizing.
Thank you.
My pleasure. This was a lot of fun.
I have one more question, the last question for the day, I guess, at least from me. The tools that you're using for this, the links, in addition to the CTO.ai, which, by the way, have a messed up footer, yeah, so in additional tools that you can recommend for flow engineering, value stream mapping, any of that, right? It will be great if you can share that.
I've actually made a website for this. And if I could throw it in the chat, but it's actually just valuestream.link. So if you go to valuestream.link, it's everything. Everything that, all the software that helps you look at a value stream, and a bunch of other resources around like how to think about this and how to measure things like value streams and flow, and it's just a collection that I use to put all that in one place.
Cool, thank you.
No problem. I got that question a lot, so I built this site. Luckily, it didn't take me too long, but I I wanted a place to put all that stuff, so I had an easy answer.
It's easy when people come prepared. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not my first rodeo.
That was great, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Dave.
you. Thank you very much. If we don't have any further questions, I want to thank Steve. I want to thank everybody for joining this session and joining all of our sessions this year. We are going to call this end of the season for the user group. We are back in September, and I believe it's going to be second September of the month, first of the month. So it will be September 8th, most likely. I will post on the meetup whatever sessions we're going to have at that time. Please check the meetup. And again, thank you all. Have a great summer. Have a great evening. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So happy to be the season finale.
The big finale. Nicely done.
Bye,
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Take care.